Welcome to the Israel Innovation Show, episode number 9. Today, I am very honored to welcome a guest here, Dr. Ariel Katz. And Dr. Ariel Katz is a long-time Army and Navy veteran, but who is also known in Israel for being one of the pioneers of artificial intelligence. He has been researching that since the mid-90s. And Dr. Katz has also developed several startups and took one of them from zero to all the way to an IPO at the NASDAQ. And the company was later sold for about $600 million. So Dr. Katz is a real authority in getting innovative startups to success. Dr. Katz also lectures at, he was a lecturer at the Technion, the famous Technion in Israel, but he's also a guest lecturer at several universities. And today he's a thought leader and developed a concept that we will hear about today called behavioral innovation. So welcome, Dr. Katz. I'm very happy that you're on the show today.
Thank you very much, Mark, and I'm happy you invited me.
Great. Let's jump right in. And can you tell us what is behavioral innovation? Because that term is new to me.
If you think about innovation today in the world, so when people speaking about innovation, they have two dimensions in mind. The first one is technology. The second dimension is creativity. But is much more than that, is how you behave during the process. Building or establish a startup to big company or building innovation, even in big companies, is always a process. And the question how you behave and what culture you adapt during the process. And I would say that the idea came for me from the economic. You know, in the last 10 years, twice, researchers got Nobel Prize on behavioral economics. And what they disclosed or discovered is that actually the economics rules not always are relevant and sometimes are totally non-relevant. What is more relevant, how people behave, how people feel about it. And is more important and more impact on the economic rather than the pure economical rule. So I say the behavioral innovation is the third dimension of the innovation that is on top of the technology and creativity is also how you behave and how you act.
What are the key factors of behavioral innovation?
You know, if I would like to start with example from the nature. If you look on the nature, you can see two basic processes. You see evolution and you see mutation. And it's very similar to startups because most of the mutation die, are not relevant and not exist. But there are few innovations that become dominated and actually become the most dominated species because they actually adjust the same to the current and future conditions. So the difference between these two processes is that when you are based on evolution curve is always you have prediction. You take the history and based on the history you predict very well how the future will look. But when it's a mutation, there is totally no history and the history is not relevant. The history may create you boundaries. So the big companies always can act very well on the evolution processes because they know the history, they have good system in place, they know how to predict, they have the resources, and always coming with better product as the new generation of product. But if you're taking mutation where the history not exists at all, then of course you need to learn the present, they predict the future, and being the first when the compelling need appeared. This is the first rule. The second rule, I would say, is to manage the uncertainty because when you have no past, you have totally uncertainty. And as a human being, we always, when we have uncertainty, we're trying to convert the uncertainty to certainty condition. And whenever we convert the uncertainty condition to certainty, actually we are paying big penalty. So as a startup, you have to build the culture of the company to work under certainty condition and not always in certainty terms.
Okay, so we have so first you said that the large companies, they have a lot of data to look back on, so you will usually use historical data to project and make decisions for the future, and so which we call evolution. And then mutation is when you don't have anything to look back on because things have never been done that way. So for example, I guess what could be some examples, like maybe Uber, like we had a tech, or go ahead.
I will give you a few examples. The first stage where the iPhone came, moving from Nokia to iPhone, was mutation. Is total new equipment, total new phone. But moving from iPhone 4 to iPhone 10 is improving the future. You can do market research. You know what the market wants, and then you can adjust and make it and make better phone. But if you look on the big picture, so for example, take Walmart. The fact that Walmart knew the consumer business best, it didn't help them to conclude that the next generation of retail would be via Amazon structure. The fact that the Hilton knew the tourism business the best than everybody else didn't help them to conclude that the next generation will be Airbnb. And and the same with the travel agency, with Booking, and the same with the taxi drivers, Uber. So what is interesting, when mutation appeared, sometimes it's even killed the giant, because the business became totally new business. Nokia not exist maybe, but definitely not on the size that they were.
Okay, and this is something that is driven by the startup with the vision, right? It's not driven by just how the market evolves, because the market by itself was not going to evolve into a sharing economy or or a totally new type of use for a phone or input interface. So it's something that's an innovation that still has to be pushed to the market through a company, right? Or through a founder or a startup.
The innovation needs to push to the market, but the real thing is that you have a lot of independent variables that create changes, and at certain point that appear in the junction on the same time. And this is how the revolution occurred, which means if you take, for example, Amazon, there were a lot of information. The computer capacity was totally different, the internet, the emails, the using the credit cards, the shops. So there were so many changes in the market that each one of them was independent change. But when all of them came together, they created totally new business.
Mm-hmm. Okay. But how can what do startups need to know about this, nowadays? Like what is the role of a startup? How do you define it?
I think that the first role is that you have to build a culture in order to be able to act under uncertainty way, which means you cannot jump directly and convert any uncertainty to certainty, because whenever you convert it, the uncertainty to certainty, you lose a lot of dimensions. So the first thing, you have to act under uncertainty. But the big question is, if you're working under uncertainty, how you operate the business, what culture you have to adapt in order to be able to execute under uncertainty conditions. And this is come to the second rule, that in any business, you always can manage the reward or manage the risk. You can having the same $20 million and say, now the potential of the business is $1 billion, I'm taking the $20 billion and running to the business and to the market. If you are not 100% sure and you don't have the right comparison to be confident how you're moving and how you deliver the potential, then probably you make mistakes. So I would say that in startups, you need to move from managing rewards to managing risks. And if you look on big companies, the culture of big companies, whenever they put one penny in the business, they're asking what is the return of the investment, which means they're asking what is my reward for the dollar that I'm putting in the market. But in the startups where you work in new area that may be developed and you don't know exactly the way moving from your stage to the next stage, then you have to manage the risk and not the reward.
But isn't that can't that even be more risky? Like if I have a campaign and I'm trying to get like a good ROI on my money for a marketing campaign, or a publicity campaign, what does managing risk look like? So managing risk looks like just saying, like, taking a step back and saying, like, this whole thing may not be the right way to go, so we should not invest too much in it, even if the ROI is good. Or what does it mean? Or, like, how do you manage risk in concrete terms?
There are two different questions here. The first, how you conclude the ROI. If you conclude the ROI based on evolution and deep knowledge about the market and the impact of the improvement, slight improvement of the new generation of product, I assume that is accurate and you know how to measure the ROI. If when Airbnb came first to the market or Booking came from the market, there were no comparison. So they put assumption. I assume that they had ROIs, but there is a lot of uncertainty, and no one can say that the ROI, the confident the ROI is the ROI. So I will give you an example. A startup raised $20 million and wants to go to the market in the US. There are two options: to recruit and build all the systems, strong team, or to go other way around and saying, no, I'm starting in a small city. I need to learn the system. And when I will know exactly how the business react, then I will go to the next stage. It takes a little bit longer, but at the end of the day, you're moving step by step. And if you're doing the pilot instead with $20 million, with $1 million, then you are managing your risk because you still have $19 million in your pocket. And if you're doing mistake with the $20 million, is the end of the story. So I will give you an example that when I established Via was a medical food prescription product in the United States. And I went to ask the people that knows about the business, that work in the pharmaceutical business many years. And all of them told me that if you don't bring $30 million for the pilot, you will not be able to conduct the pilot because they're thinking about conducting pilot. And I said, no, with $3 million, I will be able to do that. But the way that I made it, I went to South Carolina, to Greenville, South Carolina. I took one city, started with one rep, started to approach doctors, have seen how they react. And only when I have seen what are the challenges and how I need to implement corrective actions, I moved to the next stage. And then to North Carolina, and then to Atlanta, slowly. So at the end of the day, instead running pilot for $3 million, I lost less than $3 million, and I brought the company to profitable after, I would say, 2 years. Okay. Which is managing the risk. I'm saying I cannot go on the same time with critical mass. I have to learn how the market reacts. And I found a lot of problems in terms of the information that I give, in terms of how doctor reacts, in terms of the supply chain, so that unless I'm doing the pilot, there was no way to know.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so the lesson here in my book would be to something that you also maybe learn a little bit from, like the lean model canvas, where you say, okay, every time you have everything that you do completely new in the market, you have hypotheses and you have to test them before going further steps or before pumping too much money into it in development. You have to always get feedback from the market quickly, or well, quickly and in a small section of the market, and then adapt or pivot as needed before you launch wide. So, for example, Airbnb, they knew that they probably had not exact, they probably had a similar idea to what it is today, but it's still, it evolved. But the initial idea was maybe just rent out an air mattress in the living room, and so they had this idea. But if they just say, okay, the only way this will work is if we get maximum exposure and the whole world needs to know about it, they would have just pumped all their money, and they didn't even have money in this case. But if they had funding, they shouldn't have just pumped it all into like maximum exposure. But as you're saying, that's what managing the risk is then. So trying things in a small market with a small budget, and only continue when you know you've adjusted it in the right way. Is that summing it up?
This is a good summary, and there is additional point is when you're building business, you can go forward or backward. Forward is from the technology to the market, and backward from the market to the technology. So you have to develop the minimum that you need in order to go to the market, and then moving backward instead forward. Which means companies in startups many times and in technology spending a lot of money to make great product, but they didn't ask, is really the market wants this product? Or what are the changes? Or are the small details that will make it non-relevant? So on top of what you said, I think we have to build the better side as soon as you can go to the market and starting moving backward. And if you're going backward or forward, the development sometimes is different.
But what do you mean by backward? Because it's
from the market to the technology, and not from the technology to the market.
Oh, okay. So basically getting feedback from the market, incorporating that into your decisions, and then maybe changing the product, the direction, the business model, whatever. Okay. So it's always it's getting feedback both ways. That's forward back.
It's getting feedback, but you have to present the better side as soon as possible. You don't need to make the most advanced product. You need to make the minimum that you need in order to be able to present on the market. And sometimes the market telling you things that you even didn't think about it. And then you need to make full changes. So it's a difference.
Okay, so this is the theory that, okay, we as in a startup, you may need to make quick decisions, and you have to get feedback from the market and not put all your eggs in one basket and all that. But in practical terms, so because there are so many startups that are failing, right? I mean, maybe 95% or 99% or whatever it is. So what does it actually mean for let's say a startup who has funding, where from a VC, which is a lot what we see in Israel, a very strong VC scene. So let's say a startup that has some funding from a VC, and the VC has, let's say, a board member in the startup, and in concrete terms, like what are the challenges for a founder then to make decisions, like where he might be influenced by different stakeholders? Like how do you manage that? Or does everyone need to understand? Like, I guess you have to get everyone on the same understanding for this.
It's a little bit, catch-22 story, because theoretically you think that the guys that have experience has the best knowledge, theoretically. But if you look on the world and take all the big companies today, from Facebook, Google, Apple, Airbnb, WeWork, those who build really material companies in the market, most of them were very young with zero experience. You cannot find a single case of huge company that moved from with a very and with a lot of experience management to create something new. You can find other way around. You can find big companies with a lot of experience that were there. You can see what happened to the Kodak. You can see what happened to Yellow Pages and other companies. So the first thing that I would say, that the experience is not the key component there, because the experience get you two things. first of all, you lose your naivety because you have so many failures on the way that you are not naive anymore. But the naivety is what takes you far away. And the second point is that you build yourself with the boundaries. So sometimes you need to build the boundaries. And I'm sure that if you would interview all the CEO of these big companies, they will tell you that the big guys told that it will not work. Mm-hmm. So actually, you have to ask yourself, do I run now a business of evolution, or do I run a business of mutation? If I'm running a business of mutation, what justification I have that the market really will need it? How I am confident that the market will really need my product? What are the flows and the storms that happen in the market that in few years or few weeks or few months will come to the junction that will say, I need your product? So this is, you need to build a hypothesis. And once you build your hypothesis, you have to build a plan how you are going, like statistic, how you are going to measure that the hypothesis that you're building is right.
Okay. So, all right. So one takeaway for that is don't necessarily rely on experience and experienced advice, especially if you are in a business of mutation. In other words, if what you're bringing on the market is completely new and a completely new way of doing things that people don't even know there's a need for. So if it's evolutionary, not evolutionary. If it's mutational, I guess we'd have to say, then or if it's really a quantum leap in innovation, so innovative, then don't rely on experience too strong. But someone leading up to this interview, someone said that a lot of startups may fail because of the founders being too overconfident and not listening to others with more experience, or not putting themselves in the shoes of others. Now that doesn't necessarily contradict each other, because I think what you said is that if the key is really asking yourself, what indicators do I have to measure that the market wants my product and needs my product and understands my product and accepts my product, and how can I measure that? How can I prove that? What can I do to test that? And I think that's, as long as someone is focused on that, then there's not so much danger of just being overconfident in the solution we're bringing that I'm not able to see when it's not going anywhere.
But I think the way to balance it, you say overconfident that the market will change, and this is right. The overconfidence sometimes is translated to take all the money that you have and run to the market. And this is where you have to manage the risk. At the moment that you even are confident that this is the change, you need to assume that you will fail in the delivery between where you are and to the market, and you ask, what are the small changes that I'm building my confidence, not based what I think in Tel Aviv, but based how the market reacts and based how the market is paying my invoices. And this is where the failing point. The failing point is not in the break the boundaries. The failing point is from break the boundaries to take all you have and running the business. And then instead to manage the risk is to manage just the reward that this is $1 billion company. So no, you have to assume with all the confidence that you will fail, and then you have to build a very systematic tool, how you're moving, and build the confidence based on market reaction and not based on dreams.
Now that's very interesting, because I'm thinking a lot of founders have Steve Jobs as a hero, as a role model, but they don't see the whole picture, because Steve Jobs, of course, had this unique ability to know what the market needed or wanted before the market even knew it. That's what they say, but the truth is, so maybe like, for example, when he came out with the iPod, the MP4 player for digital music, he wasn't even the first, but he said, okay, this is, he was seeing that where the market was going, but it doesn't mean that he put they just developed it and just threw it on the market, because all the things you don't see is that they actually did all these tests, right? I mean, they had feedback from customers, from their own users, from their own employees, and they were working with these, and so they're actually the products that they bring on the market. You can when you ever touch an Apple product, you know that like it has almost no bugs. It's like it's like the whole user interface. It's so perfected already, and so they do all this work beforehand. They don't just like blindly, because you can only get that with feedback. You can't do that just in a lab. Just build a perfect product and then throw it on the market. So maybe people don't see that. So, but right.
And the other point that come also for the failures of the startups is when you measure the reward, you have to give a lot of promises. And when you give a lot of promises, you increase the expectation. And when you increase the expectation is immediately correlated with the level of disappointment if you don't deliver the expectation. So you're taking, let's say, $20 million, you decided instead to build a plan that will go step by step to take the $20 million because you want to get the reward as soon as possible to get the exit tomorrow morning. You probably are wrong. You lose the money, but you promise your board that it will be $1 billion next year, but it doesn't. And then the disappointment is very high. So when you manage startup, you have multi-dimension to manage. You need to manage the disappointment and the expectation. You need to manage the process. You need to manage moving from the market backward and not from the technology forward. You have to feel and build a system that you learn the present because you have no future and you have to act in uncertainty. And if you look on the culture today, let's take the VCs. When a small startup comes to the VC and ask for investment, they will ask you about P&L, they will ask you about the business plan, and I've seen in my life 1,000 P&Ls, and I have not seen one that made a P&L, but it doesn't bother all the VCs to ask you the P&L. So if 1,000 companies didn't reach the P&L, probably it's not a good system.
Right. Just a business plan on a napkin is better sometimes.
Yes, but this is the right.
Yeah, but it's true. So
they have seen 1,000, they have seen that they never met, but P&L coming from the big companies' cultures, when they know exactly what they are doing and they can predict what will be the future. P&L is not relevant for the small guys.
So would you say a startup looking for funding or negotiating funding should try to get investors who understand this concept, that they can't focus on the reward if it's such an innovative thing, but they have to share the long-term vision of the startup? I mean, we're almost out of time, but this is so interesting, and I think this is just like the nuggets are just coming here. So I do want to continue a little bit, but I mean, like what takeaways, like what would you recommend for startups listening to this, for takeaways from?
I would say the first thing that I would say, be brave to break the boundaries and to think out of the box. However, take in consideration that even with all confidence that you have with breaking the boundaries, you probably are wrong, and there is a learning process, and therefore act with small stages in order to build the confidence that you're moving from one stage to another. And you know how to improve your product and how to implement corrective actions and how to do that. You know, one thing that we learn very well in the Army, and I use always, is the debriefing. You cannot skip the debriefing. You know, many times you fail and we start to give excuses. So I believe that the debriefing needs to be a key component in the business. And debriefing you can do only when you have a clear expectation for the next stage and saying it's binary, I reach or I didn't, and then doing debriefing what was wrong. And then you can have corrective action. If you're not putting the expectation and then started to translate not meeting what you said by good excuses that always are good excuses. Our Corona, our investors, always you have good excuses. A good excuses is something that you never miss. Always they exist around you. So I think this break the boundaries, but will very analytical way, while the basic assumption has to be it's not true. Now you have to test this based step by step. And
Wow, great.
debrief,
Okay, go ahead.
and I'm saying debrief every stage.
Well, so I think I would sum it up in this way: if you work in a startup or if you're building a startup, no matter what stage you're in, you must always remember that the mission you're on is actually a long journey of constant trial and error, trial and error, trial and error, and and at each cycle you get better and you improve and you find the right path, and that's really what it's about. It's not having one goal and aiming for that and just reaching that. It's really it's a process of that you're in the business of trying, understanding, getting feedback from the market, readjusting, and doing that over and over and over to the next level. Ariel, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mark.
Very, very valuable. Thank you. And I will. How can people get in touch with you?
Via the LinkedIn, I think it's the best way.
I will post the LinkedIn to wherever this video is. It will your LinkedIn will be in the comments, so people can contact you. Wonderful. Thank you very much, and have a great day.
Appreciate it.
Thank you for coming on.
Bye bye.